A group of men grieving over something more despicable than themselves. I wrote Frown of Dread. They just kind of start hula dancing with these people. He just sounded really old. The bar was in hell. What's up, guys? My name is Natalie, and welcome to my Nook of Novels. In today's video, I am going to be telling you guys my thoughts on every book that I read in June. So at the time that I'm filming this, June is not completely over yet. It's only the 24th of June, so we still have about a week left. So I still have some time to complete a couple more things if I really want to. I'll start with what I'm currently reading and kind of what I think that I might get done by the end of the month. So the first thing I'm currently reading is Unravel Me by Tahara Mafi, and this is something that I've been reading to my boyfriend. We are not super far into this. We are on page 110, so a little ways in. We're honestly not making super fast progress in this, so I really do not expect to nearly finish this or finish this by the end of the month. But this is just something that I've read a little bit of here and there throughout June. And my other current read is Clockwork Angel by Cassandra Clare, and I'm almost halfway through this one. I'm on page 207, and this is definitely something that I'm hoping and planning to finish by the end of June. I don't know for sure if I will. I don't want to say that I 100% definitely will finish this because I feel like I'm jinxing it and setting myself up for failure if I say that, but this is like my main current read that I'm really trying to prioritize at the moment, so this is definitely one that I am going to try really hard to complete this month. So far, I've been enjoying it a decent amount. I'm definitely not loving it as much as I was loving the Mortal Instruments series, but at the same time, I'm only halfway through this and it's the first book in a new trilogy, so a lot of it has just been like introducing me to the characters, like building up the world and just the plot and stuff like that. So I wouldn't really expect a ton to be happening so far, but I'm kind of just at a little bit of a slow spot in the book, so it is definitely dragging a little bit, and I'm not fiending to pick this up or anything like that, but I definitely think that the end of this book is going to hook me a little bit more than the start of it has, and hopefully I will fly through the rest of this and make reasonable progress in this book. Hopefully my enjoyment levels will go up more and more as I continue with the series, but as of right now we're sitting at like a 3 or 3.5 stars, but again, I'm expecting to love this trilogy as we progress throughout the books, so hopefully that is the case, but as of right now I am only halfway through this one. As for everything else that I've read this month, I'm just gonna kind of go in chronological order, so I'm gonna start with the very first book that I finished in June, and that is actually an audiobook I was listening to, which is The Hunt for Red October by Tom Clancy. And when I went into this book, my expectations were honestly below the floor. Like, the bar was in hell. This was not something that I was really expecting to enjoy at all. Someone gifted me this book a few years ago, I think, and I want to say it was like free from a thrift store because it's super beat up. I have read a Tom Clancy book before, and I wasn't really in the mood for it. I didn't love the writing, and I honestly skimmed most of the book just because I really didn't care at all. It was a sci-fi, I want to say, and I couldn't even tell you what it was about or what it was even called, but I just didn't care at all, and so I was really expecting similar things from this, especially because this is a World War II book, and I just don't really like war stories that much, especially when it's like actual combat fighting in the real world. If it's a fantasy war, if it's like politics in that regard, or like battle scenes, then I'm all for it, but something about like real world history, I just don't enjoy it as much in books, even when it's a fictional setting, when there's twists in it, things like that. I just don't really care, so I just really didn't think I was gonna like this, and it was actually a lot better than I was expecting it to be. I gave it 3 stars because I thought it was decent. I didn't love it by any means, but I was definitely interested in the things that were happening, and I thought that the kind of political elements of it were very unique, and it was definitely very politics focused, so it kind of centered around the leaders of these countries and kind of their ploys and their plans to outmaneuver the other side in this war, and I thought that was done really well. It kept my attention well enough, even though it was an audiobook that I was fully expecting to not like it all. So definitely gets some bonus points for that. And so kind of the main plot of this is there is a submarine submarine. It's a Russian submarine, I'm pretty sure. And the United States like detects it, and they're trying to figure out what the submarine is like, what's going on with it. This isn't like me spoiling it, but I'm pretty sure what was going on is it was defecting to the United States. But the United States like knew that, but wanted Russia to think that they didn't know that. Their plan was to like steal the submarine without the Russians knowing. I just thought that was so interesting. And the politics were just really clever. The things that they were planning were very clever and unique. It was just keeping my attention a lot better than I was expecting it to. It was just more enjoyable than what I was originally anticipating. The things I wrote down about this, I said, well written. I don't really like war books. I liked it more than I thought I would. And that's all I wrote. So yeah, that pretty much sums up everything that I thought about this book. The next thing that I read was City of Glass by Cassandra Clare, and I loved this book. I thought it was so good. I gave this 4.5 stars. And I don't know if I mentioned, but I gave The Hunt for Red October 3 stars. But anyway, City of Glass. I just thought that this book was so good. I thought the plot was so interesting, and it was so fast-paced, especially with how it switched perspectives around, because this is told in third person, so it isn't through the eyes of any of the particular characters, but it's still kind of following them, and you can see what each character is thinking and experiencing, even though you're kind of on the outside of it. This definitely bounces around a lot more in perspective than the first 2 books did, because I want to say those were mostly just focused on the perspective of Clary, the main character, and a little bit here and there on some of the side characters, but City of Glass really expanded on that quite a lot, and pretty much every single chapter would have multiple perspectives within it. So you'd be bouncing from Clary to Simon to Isabel to Jace to Alec. You really got to explore more of the characters in terms of their role within the major group of people. You can kind of see each character more as a whole person and kind of how they impact the people around them and the things that affect them and make them who they are. So it just kind of adds a lot to the characterization of everyone within the story, but then it also made the plot move a lot faster as well, because everyone was kind of a little bit more separated in this book, kind of doing their own thing. Because I think the first 2 books, it kind of felt like everyone was kind of holding Clary's hand the whole time, in the sense that obviously she was being introduced to this world alongside the reader, so everywhere she went, it was kind of in a group with everybody else. But in the 3rd book, she's kind of her own Shadowhunter person. She felt like more of a human in book 1, and she feels like a full Shadowhunter in book 3 because of her training and her progress and the things that she's learned throughout the books. And so it kind of felt like there was just more room to explore everyone else in this book and all of the other fantastical elements that were contributing to this bigger plot, if that makes sense. So there was just a lot more happening because the characters were doing their own separate things so much more often. So you would be in Simon's perspective and something crazy would happen there, and then you'd bounce over to Alec, and then you'd go to Clary. It still made sense too. It wasn't like there was too much going on. Like, it all just flowed really nicely, and it was a great, like, the pacing was wonderful in this book, and it just felt like such a classic fantasy book where there was just all of these like magical elements. And there was this one scene that was just done so well, because there was like all this betrayal and death and magical aspects to it, and there was just so much going on, and it was just so good. All the battle scenes were done so well, and honestly just every part of this book was so enjoyable. And this was a great way to wrap up the first part of the Mortal Instruments series, and it just made me really excited for the second half of it. So I give that 4.5 stars, and all the notes that I wrote down about this were as follows. Something great finally happened. The character dynamics are both frustrating and extremely entertaining. Pacing was great. Driving to walking distance ratio was wrong. So I'll explain what that was about in just a second. I was on the edge of my seat. This felt like such a quick read. Classic YA fantasy. Nicely tied up loose ends. This was truly great. So the driving to walking distance thing, that was just something where, as an aspiring book editor, this was something that just bothered me, that I noticed as I was reading it. So this was close to the beginning of the book. I want to say it was around like 50 pages in. They were trying to get to location A, and they ended up in location B instead. And one of the characters mentioned where they ended up was an hour drive away from where they were trying to get to. And they said that it was going to take them all afternoon to get where they were going, which didn't make sense at all, because when I put it into my Google Maps, when I put in somewhere that was an hour drive away, it told me that it would take like 21 hours to walk there. And he was like, oh, it'll take all afternoon. And then a couple pages later, he said that it would take 2 or 3 hours, which is just not even close to what it actually would have taken. And I think like what I put into my GPS was like a straight like interstate path. So obviously if it was like more windy roads, that would lessen it by quite a bit. So it might cut it down to like 9 hours, but definitely 2 to 3 hours was way of an underestimate. And I just think that's something the author should have fact checked as she went, because I don't know, it kind of just felt like she was throwing out random numbers thinking like, oh, I'll fix this later, and then never fixed it. At least that's like how I was interpreting it as I read it. But aside from that, that was just one tiny like editor thing that bothered me. Everything else in it, again, like I said, was really, really enjoyable and gave almost 5-star vibes. So that's why I gave this one 4.5 stars. The next thing I read was Saga Volume 7 by Fiona Staples and Brian K. Vaughan. I really don't think that I can give many thoughts on this book, just because I feel like all of the Saga books kind of blend together in my brain, and there's just so many like individual volumes of this that I cannot tell you what happened in this one versus number 6 or number 8, but overall it's definitely a really enjoyable story, and the plot is definitely there. It's very fast-paced, and there's not ever a point in these series that get boring or anything like that, just because they just move along so well, and the authors really know what they're doing in terms of planning out the story and the characters and the relationships between the characters and everything like that. It's just all done really well. And the only thing I wrote about this was the cute characters are so cute. Some of the characters are so adorable. So yeah. The next thing I finished this month was Destroy Me by Tahara Mafi, and this is a novella in the Shatter Me series. It comes after book 1, and I really enjoyed this novella. I give it 4 stars. So this book, Unite Me, is 2 separate novellas. The first one is Destroy Me, and the second one is Fracture Me, which has this as like the cover on it. The first half of this is Destroy Me. So I thought that this was done really well. It has the same like super poetic writing style to it that makes it really speed vibe. It's written in a way that's both so beautiful and just so easy to fly through, which I really don't know how to explain how that works, because I feel like it's either really pretty or really fast, but this one just does both so well, because it has all these like short choppy sentences, but they use all these like beautiful metaphors that just makes it so smooth to fly through. So it's really enjoyable. This novella specifically kind of followed the villain of the first story, so it's from his perspective, and it kind of shines him in more, not necessarily of a positive light, but it kind of places him in a way where you can kind of see where he's coming from and understand him as a character a little bit better. And I really think that it just adds a lot to the series. I love when a short story doesn't feel like the author is just bullshitting their way through to make more content. It really feels like a central part of the rest of the series, and this really does that, in my opinion. I just really enjoyed kind of seeing this character and his motivations and why he does the things that he does, and it just made me think so much more about the things that happened in the first book. And as I'm reading Unravel Me right now, everything just really makes me ponder, because he's just such a complex character, and it kind of makes you think about if he really is a villain or not, which obviously he is, but there's so many reasons why he does the things that he does, and not all of it is necessarily up to him. It's just really interesting, and I really enjoyed this. So I gave it 4 stars, like I said. The things I wrote down, I said, I love morally great characters. This really messes with my sense of empathy. I'm almost rooting for the bad guy. This really adds to the series. So yeah, this was just really good. The next thing I read was High Tide in Hawaii by Mary Pope Osborne, the 28th book in the Magic Treehouse series. And this one was just really fun. I don't really know how to review a Magic Treehouse book just because they're so short and there's not a lot that happens in them, but they're super whimsical and fun, and it really brings me back to being a child again and reading Magic Treehouse. The things I wrote down were some of the interactions are so unrealistic and it makes me giggle. These books are so fun. Adult books need to be illustrated more often, and I love when I'm reading it and then I get to a page that's just mostly illustrated, and it just adds a lot to it. I don't know, it adds to the experience of reading, and I just think it's super fun. So yeah, and then the character interactions thing. So there was this scene that I just thought was really silly as I was reading High Tide in Hawaii. They approach this Hawaiian tribe and they just kind of start hula dancing with these people, and this tribe of people is asking them where they're from, and they kind of just vaguely say like, oh, we just came from over there, and everyone is just super trustworthy of these 2 kids who just wandered onto their grounds. And I just think it's really silly because the world doesn't work like that. Obviously they would be like, hey, genuinely, where are you from? They would be super suspicious and asking if they were spies or anything like that, but all the characters are just like, okay, so we're best friends now. And I just think it's really silly and like super whimsical, and it just makes it super fun to read. So that made me laugh, and yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I gave it 4 stars. The next one that I read is Saga Volume 8 by Fiona Staples and Brian K. Vaughan. This one I actually do have some genuine Coherent thoughts on. As I was reading this to my boyfriend, I pointed out that I enjoy the representation that is being brought up in this series, right? And so my boyfriend actually, he had some really interesting thoughts about the way that that's done in this book, because they're talking about being like transgender, and they're talking about abortion and things like that, and they kind of do it in a way that it just could be very unique and interesting, and it could be incorporated into the fantastical elements of this story and these sci-fi worlds where everything is on these different planets and these moons, and it's just very fantastical. But they incorporate these present day ideas that are super relevant to American society today, and they just kind of throw them into this book, into this fantastical world where they almost feel like they don't really belong. There was a character who, I've always been pro-life because blah blah blah, and this other character is like, well, you also have to think about like this, and like what would you do in this situation, because obviously, you know, it's more complex than it sometimes seems like it is. He didn't have to use the words pro-life and things like that, so it kind of just made it seem like a low effort, like they just kind of threw these ideas into here without incorporating them into the fantasy elements of the story. So that could have been done better, I think. But again, like I said, I do really like the representation in this book and kind of where these things are going. This whole series is kind of revolving around this war that's going on, and just the fact that it would be so much easier if there could just be peace, if people would just focus on the love between the characters instead of, you know, everyone's differences and things like that. And so it's very relevant to the overall themes of this series, but again, it's just the way that certain things are done doesn't necessarily align with the story itself. Again, super enjoyable still. The plot is really great, really fascinating. I'm loving the characters, so this is definitely a great graphic novel series. And I gave this one 4 stars, and the things I wrote down were great series. I really like the representation. Some of the topics could be a little more fantasy incorporated, and this cover is really nice. And yeah, I do really like this cover. When I pick up some of the Saga books, I feel like I hold them up and I'm like looking at them, and I feel like I don't really know what I'm looking at all the time, but this one I just really like the colors, and this is a really cool zebra, and I think he's really cool. So yeah, I like this one a lot. The next book that I read is Notes on an Execution by Danya Kukafka, and y'all better buckle up and grab a snack because I have so many thoughts on this book. I loved this so much. I gave this book 5 stars, and I just thought that this was such a profound and emotional and lovable story. I found this to be so interesting with such complex characters who affect each other in such complex ways, and the main character is so morally gray, but he's also just a bad person. He's done a lot of horrible, terrible things, so he's not a good character, he's not a good person, but you can't help but feel for him throughout everything that he has to experience. I just love this. I'll summarize what this is about. This follows a man who is on death row, and it's told in second person, so you are the person who's on death row as you are experiencing the things he is going through being in jail and being on death row. And then it also goes back in time and kind of tells the story about who he was in the past, the things he did to end up in this place, and it's told through the perspective of different people that he knows. So his mother, someone who grew up in a foster home with him, his ex's twin sister, things like that. So people who know of him and have been affected by his actions throughout the years, but not necessarily people who know him or things like that. So it's just such a poetic story, the way that it's told, and it made me react so many times. There were so many moments where I gasped or was distraught and had to just like pause and set the book down. There's just so many moments like that. So I really want to go through my annotations of this book with you guys because I just had so many thoughts and so many things to say. I just want to really delve into every single thing that this book made me think and feel. I'm just gonna start at the beginning of this and go through every single sticky note that I wrote. A lot of these are literally just what I reacted. So I literally just wrote on the sticky note, what, or something like that. So it's not gonna take extremely long to go through all of these because a lot of them are very brief, but we're gonna go through them anyway. So the first one is actually just a pretty quote, and it says, "I will love you like the ocean loves the sand." And then after that was a reaction, and I said, oh my gosh. But especially towards the beginning of this book, something that really hooked me in the very beginning of this book is it's following his mother in the beginning and her life from giving birth to Ansel until a couple years later. And he had a very abusive father. So her husband kind of turns into this terrible person who makes her life a living hell. He is just one of the worst human beings who could ever walk this earth. He just kind of ruins everything. You can really see how that starts this snowball effect of terrible things that happen throughout the book. And so that really was like the root of just a lot of my reacting to things that were happening, was just things revolving around what he caused, what he created, like what he did. So there was a lot about that, and there's just a lot of like really shocking moments throughout this, so I'll keep going. The next thing I wrote was after that I wrote frown of dread, because apparently I frowned in a dreadful way when I read that scene. The next sticky note is just a drawing of the face. The next one is another pretty quote. I'm not really sure exactly where this starts and ends, but I'll just go through this whole paragraph. Lavender creaked open the window, stuck her face into the morning. The breeze was a gasp on her cheeks, the dewy air like a new kind of promise. Beyond, the fields were a morning yellow. Beyond. Beyond was a place Lavender could hardly remember. Beyond this room, beyond this house, there were mothers who cooked pot roast for their children. There were little boys who watched cartoons on Saturday mornings, innocent and unafraid. Buttered popcorn at the movie theater, boxed cereal, real toothpaste. There were televisions and newspapers and radios, schools and bars and coffee shops. Before she moved to the farmhouse, a man had landed on the moon. For all she knew, there could be a whole city up there by now. I thought that was really pretty. The next sticky note was, I knew it! I cannot. I do remember saying a lot of these things as I was reading, especially the first half of this that I read during the 24-hour readathon I did. I definitely remember being half conscious and literally losing my shit over this book because it was so good. Gasp. The next one's another pretty quote. Someday, Lavender hoped her children would wade into the ocean. When they did, they would taste her. Lavender's love and a mouthful of salt. Next, we have, despite it all, you are thankful for the memory, for the sight of the sea tumbling in the distance. It is possible, looking at the ocean, to believe it never ends. Then we have, oh, and then we have, oh my god. I remember this one specifically was the story completely made you think that something in particular was happening, and it definitely wasn't at all, but I just remember getting to that part and I was like, no, he didn't. Don't tell me he did this because this would be insane. And he didn't. Don't worry. That did not happen, but still, it was distressing to say the least. The next thing says, so manipulative, because I audibly said that when I got to that part. Another pretty quote. The possibilities are endless. They prove that who I am, my goodness or my badness, is fluctuating. Morality is not fixed. It's fluid, ever-changing. Next we have, then we have, what? Then we have, what? Again, a lot of this, obviously, you can't even gather my thoughts from it, but I like that there's so much just reaction. I love when a book makes me react. I love that it's so impactful that I am physically saying things or making certain facial expressions or gasping. I love when a book has such a big impact on me that I can't just sit in silence and keep reading. I have to let out my emotion and my agony or whatever the book is making me feel. The next one says, the city was a monster. She stepped into the mouth of it. Next we have, if she plugged her ears and looked up, the blank and starless night could almost be home. Then I'm going to skip this sticky note and come back to it because that's a huge quote that I love. The next sticky note says, oh, gasp. And then we have, oh, it's just ... I was speechless, evidently. That's all of them, but I'm gonna jump back to this one sticky note because so I just loved this whole page of this book, and I'm gonna read it to you guys, but it was, first of all, so stunning, so harrowing. I feel like it really shows the full depth of guilt versus innocence and how certain people can be affected by the American justice system. It's just so painful to read this and just think about what's going on in the world and the fact that this is based on like real stuff. American systems are so messed up. It like causes things like this, like characters and like human beings like this to just be put in terrible, terrible situations that they have no reason to be in. I'm just gonna read this out because I just think that it's so, so stunning. How do you work this job? You asked the question one noontime shift. Shauna looked tired, purple bags sinking beneath her eyes. Big Bear had been taken to the Walls unit that morning. He'd sobbed as they marched him out to the van, heaving, racking, 250 pounds of utter devastation. Big Bear, a black man with a singing voice like God. Big Bear, the only person you are absolutely certain did not deserve the death house. 20 years ago, Big Bear had been watching TV in his living room when a team of police officers burst in with a no-knock warrant meant for the man in the apartment one floor above. Big Bear kept a gun beneath the couch cushions. The room was dark. That day, the row went silent in mourning. The only sound was your whispering rage as Shauna grasped vaguely for comfort, twirling her hair anxiously between her fingers. How do you wake up every morning? You had asked, unable to keep the anger from your voice. How do you get out of bed knowing you work in a system like this? My dad had this job, she said with a shrug. My brother too. But don't you ever think about what you're participating in? Not really, Shauna had said, disinterested. You wanted to tell Shauna that she was a cog in a deplorable machine. The prisons are also companies, maximizing profit, staying afloat on a pile of bodies like Big Bear's. You have been watching the news. You have been reading the paper. It is not your problem, not your concern, but still no coincidence that you are one of only 3 white men on a pod. You wouldn't care much about all that if you were not subject to the same psychotic system. You wanted to push Shauna, but it wasn't worth the risk. You needed her too badly. She wiped a sheen of sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. You both listened to the sound of the row, muted for once, a group of men grieving over something more despicable than themselves. I just thought that was so beautiful, so stunning, because I love how this book depicts one individual's grief over things so much bigger than themselves. I feel like I just used the exact words that she said, but you know what I'm saying? Like, you can tell how this overall system of things affects each individual person. And it's not even just with that specific idea. Everything in this book, you can really see how these major moral ideas and these major events, there's just so much to it, and it's so complex, and every single person has to like digest that and process it in their own way through their own means. And even when characters do things you don't agree with, you can always understand what's happening in their head, if nothing else. And it's just so, so beautiful. It makes for such a stunning story with kind of this mystery element too that unfolds in such an interesting way. And it's just so captivating, and I could not put this down. I loved it. I was so obsessed with it. I thought it was so beautiful and so stunning, and this is just one of my favorite books of all time, I would say. I'm obsessed with this. I love this. I love literary fiction as a genre too. I really want to read more of it, and this just made me so happy to read. The things I wrote down, I gave it 5 stars, like I said. Such a powerful story. Made me react so much. I love the use of perspective. I love how all the little details and elements fit together. The fragmented way this was told had me so invested. Genuinely such a beautiful story. Brings to light true horrors in American systems. Absolutely harrowing. Revenge and grief and love and despair are also potent. Themes about good versus bad are stunning. I love this book so much. I think that really summarizes it really well. I think that this was so powerful and beautiful, and I loved it so much. The last 2 things I read this month were both audiobooks. So I finally finished Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. So when I first was reading this, I was still reading it to my boyfriend, but we got, I want to say, around 100 pages in, and we just could not take this anymore. We could not keep reading this. It's just so long, and there's a lot that happens in it, yeah, but we were just getting tired of it. We had read Fourth Wing and Iron Flame right before this, and it was just getting too much. So we stopped, and I listened to the audiobook of the rest of it, and it was pretty enjoyable. The battle scenes were definitely really good, and I'm still loving all of the characters. The one thing I'll say, like, about the story itself is it's kind of feeling really repetitive, because I feel like there was a big twist at the end of Iron Flame that it's feeling really repetitive. It's feeling like that same issue hasn't been resolved, and it's been a whole book, and they're like not making any progress towards anything. They went on all these missions and like nothing really came of them, and I just don't really feel like it's moving forward enough to keep me as invested as I feel like I should be to read something with this many pages in it and with this much hype. There was also some things about the narration of this book that really got me. First of all, something my boyfriend pointed out about the audiobook narrator is just the fact that everything she said was so like aggressive sounding. It sounded like every single character was this brooding man. Like, I get talking like that for Zayden, but it was like every single character was like angry at all times, and it just came across as really silly. It didn't seem like it fit the things that were happening always. So that was thing number one. The way everything was pronounced in this book really annoyed me so much, because every single place and every single name was pronounced differently than you would think. So when I was reading this out loud, when I was reading it to my boyfriend, I had been saying all these things and pronouncing them. I had like Basquiat and Aethbine and Teeny the dragon and Skyel and all of these things, but the audiobook pronounced it Basgiath and Athbean and Teeny and Sagale and all these things, and none of it matched what I had been reading, and there was just so many things. I get it's a fantasy book, you're gonna have crazy names with weird pronunciations, but why does every single thing have to be pronounced differently than you would think it would be? Maybe if it was one or two things, okay, whatever, but it was every single place and every single name. You cannot possibly read the book and switch to listening to the audiobook and expect any of the names to be pronounced like what you're thinking. Not at all. Everything is different, and that was really annoying. It was solid, it was pretty decent, it was enjoyable as an audiobook, so I gave it 3.5 stars. I said, story is progressing more slowly. Voice actor pronounces everything so dark and broody. I hate how everything is pronounced. Basquiat, Skyel, Teeny, etc. And it's still a pretty good fantasy book. So yeah, it was, like I said, pretty good. It was enjoyable. I'm not really sure when the 4th book comes out, but I'll still listen to that whenever it does, and I'll just hope and pray that things start moving a little faster. So yeah. The final thing that I read in the month of June was The Kill Order by James Dashner. So this is the 4th book in the Maze Runner series, and I listened to this one as an audiobook as well. Like I said, it was good. I gave it 3 stars. I definitely flew through this very quickly. I read this in 5 days, so considering I only listened to it while I was in the car, I guess I listened to it a couple times while I was just doing stuff at the house, but I remember at one point when I first started it, it was while I was doing dishes or cleaning or something like that, and I remember thinking, oh, I wonder if I've made it to chapter 2 yet, and then literally a couple seconds later, the audiobook was like chapter 6, and I was like, oh yeah, we definitely did 4 chapters ago. Super short chapters and like super quick pace. There's not a ton that happens in this, so it was easy to like follow, even though I kind of zone out while I'm listening to audiobooks, so it definitely was a pretty simple story and easy to wrap my head around, so it wasn't anything like crazy complex that was like hard for me to process or anything, so that was a good thing. Every other book in the series so far has followed the same characters and it's been focusing on the same general plot, but this one was just really different. It followed these complete other characters, and if it said how they connected to the original characters, then I completely missed it. That honestly might have been some big twist at the end that I was just not paying attention for, but honestly, like, I wasn't invested enough to care either way. If I missed it, oh well, I guess. It was just a really simple, there just wasn't a lot to it, is all I really have to say. Another thing with the narrator in this is he just sounded really old. Not like old. He sounded like a 30-year-old man, but the thing is, the main character in this is like 16, I think, so it was just like really weird, especially when he was describing the main character's actions. It just felt very disconnected and like it didn't match the voice that was saying them, so that was like a little bit bothersome, but nothing crazy. I wasn't like, oh, I can't listen to this. I didn't really care that much. It was decent. I'm glad I've made progress in another series and gone through this, so that's definitely a positive thing. So yeah, I'm happy to be done with this. Things I wrote down were narrator sounded older than main character. This felt disconnected from the Maze Runner by a lot. It was a very quick and simple story. Excited about the series progress. So basically everything exactly as I said just now. So yeah. So that is everything that I read in the month of June. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, then please hit the like button and subscribe if you would like to, and hit the notification bell if you would like to see the other videos that I post on Mondays and Thursdays, with reading sprints on every first and third Monday of the month replacing that Monday video. Comment down below what you read in the month of June. If you've read any of these books that I read this month, if there's any specific videos you guys want to see from me in the future, anything like that, just comment down below, message me, anything like that, and I will respond and see what I can do. My Bookstagram, my Goodreads, and my book talk will all be linked in the description of this video if you guys would like to check out any of those. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!